welcome back. My name is Richard Miller. You're at Never Not Here, and we're talking about existence, what exists, and is there any way that that could be knowable, or what's the sureness? What can I say about existence? And we're talking with Michael Baxter. So, hello again, Michael.
Hi, Richard. I'm not even sure if you exist, or if I exist, but I'm sure that existence exists. So
we're saying something's here.
Yes.
I guess we're saying something's here. You know, it's not a thing, and it's not some, right?
It's a thing. It is a thing. It's the ultimate thing.
The ultimate thing.
It's what we really had in mind when we cooked up the word thing.
The Maha thing.
Yes. And I'll go down with the ship, saying that there is a thing, one single thing that does exist.
So sometimes we look at the way people talk and we say, well, boy, oh boy, they're so full of distinctions, and is that helpful? And with Michael, we had charts, we had arrows, we had circles, and but we did say some things like a cycle, and a cycle of a life, a cycle of a day, a cycle of a thought. We were saying, what is this cycle where something's born? A thought is born, and where does it trace? And what's the death of a thought as it dissipates? And in one way, I said it goes down into a noise level, and then whatever pops up again, it goes into oblivion, and then whatever pops up again, another thought, somehow takes over what? Our attention. And whatever the urgency for that is, or the belief in that system, or like the attraction, the attractiveness of that thought, or that other place where our attention's going. Well, we didn't get into that, and maybe it's not necessary. But Michael, just out of like a scientist, he said, well, let's just trace one thought as if we were tracing it. Where would it go? And it was an amazing path that as it just faded and dissipated and got more and more subtle, there was a little bit of shakiness. It just felt weird, like we called it the void. And we said, should we stay? Should we get the heck out of here? Is this scary? Is this what fear is? Am I losing it? Am I losing myself? Or what happens? But somehow we had a glimpse that there's something more. There's something more than the land of those thoughts, and then there's something more than the land of the fear. And then we said, as we were pulling out of that, even more or less looking over our shoulder, we've filled that void with some sense of knowing. This is just part of this cycle. And so this is just a graphic representation. It's really not anything that, we're talking about what exists, but, this graphic representation doesn't exist. It's just a way to look at it, to say, maybe this is common to more than one of us. And so then we come out of that, and then even more than that, it's a possibility that that attraction is so great that we don't really go back into the whole cycle, that we somehow start orbiting this
spiritual heart.
The spiritual heart. We called it the spiritual heart, didn't we, Michael? You did. And so that is very. There's a great sense to it. When you talk about the heart, or the heart is to the left or the right, or wherever it is, or it's not a heart, or it's a center, or it's a nadi, or it's a node, or you give all these esoteric things to it. But something, the heart, is just this attraction that somehow we can gain a glimpse of. And, maybe we orbit it for a while and then spin off, or maybe we don't. I don't. We don't have to say how it really works or how it's going to work. We can just notice what's happening now. And
well, Richard, as you were talking about the spiritual heart, you reminded me that my favorite teacher, Ramana Maharshi, had said that the spiritual heart can be located on different scales. If you take the scale of the earth, his statement or his opinion is that the spiritual heart is that hill called Arunachala, or some people say Arunachala, which he took to be his teacher. He took to be the embodiment of Shiva, and he loved nothing more than to walk around it, to orbit it with devotion, as it were. And at another scale, at the scale of the human body, he liked to say that the spiritual heart could be found on the right side of the person's chest, just to the right of center. And he would refer to this this one chapter and verse in Ecclesiastes that says that the fool's heart is on the left and the wise man's heart is on the right. So there's something in the literature, in the various great literatures of the world, that pops up about this idea of the spiritual heart. So again, the idea of the spiritual heart is that it's an intermediate, something intermediate between Model 1, which is the self, and Model 3, which is the world. It's the forecho of the self. It's something that has the attribute of the self, in that it has that massiveness, but it's recognizable to the I feeling because it's localized. And because it's localized, the I feeling can find it and can be devoted to it, can be attracted to it, can orbit it. So that's the idea of the spiritual heart. The spiritual heart, the whole purpose of talking about the spiritual heart is that it gets us used to, when I say us, I mean those of us, all of us who have the I am feeling, the feeling that I'm here. It allows the I feeling to recognize solidness, which has a center, as a preparation for recognizing solidness, which has no center, which is the self.
So we're saying some really important things about the intermediary, because it's so easy to dismiss it and say, no, it's just this more of conventional living, but on a spiritual side, okay, a sixth sense and all that stuff, but that's just more of distinctions. That's just more of a mind and I thought and separation. Who's sixth sense? Who's got a sixth sense? And it's so easy to dismiss. And now we're saying that, in a way, there's a step to recognize what has no loci, what has no locus, is not really able to be recognized, and somehow some kind of a step to see something that's in a position, that's an imaginary eye or that's an imaginary heart center, is somehow useful. And so then it allows that usefulness to happen, because when we're rejecting it and saying, no, that's not going all the way, that's a half step, that's a compromise, then we're still, it's useless to us, and we're still in a concept of what's right and what's wrong and judgments and trying to go somewhere which is still a concept to us. And
yes, I agree. It's, from the ultimate point of view, maybe the spiritual heart is not the real thing. But for someone who's looking for a way to get started recognizing the solidness of self, the spiritual heart is, it's wonderful. And I think it's inevitable, if we look at it, just turn that around slightly and say, okay, we know that we exist, really that the prime datum of our experience is that We have this conviction that I'm here, I exist, I'm some kind of a point of awareness, I'm here. And we've heard consistently about the greatness of God or the greatness of self or the greatness of truth. But how am I going to bridge that gap?
How do we approach that?
How can we do it? So even if we want to say that we created that thing which is halfway between us and the self, it has enough of us that we can recognize it. Specifically, it has a location, it has a center, and it has the same kind of mass we do. It turns out to be a false mass, but that's okay. It has the same kind of mass that I do, so that it can attract me, I can feel its pull. And it has something from the other side. It has something from the self. It has, it has that promise of truth to it. It has that memory of self to it. It's larger than we are, but somehow smaller than self is. And best of all, it's stationary and it's localized, so we can find it. We can really check it out. We can be devoted to it. I like to say, we can orbit it.
Say again exactly what stationary means, and like how stationary with respect to what?
If there's someone who's devoted to something, then the one who's devoted is approaching the one that he's devoted to. And the one that he's devoted to doesn't have to move. It's like the Earth doesn't have to move for the moon to orbit it. So in this example, the Earth is stationary relative to the moon. And the moon is the one that does the motion around the Earth. So the idea is that the spiritual heart is stationary relative to the I am feeling, so that the I feeling can move around that. Can be, to move around something, it's a beautiful thing. Are we moving? Are we not moving? Well, we are moving, but our acceleration is zero, so there's a constant kind of a motion. If you think about it, if you were beginning to fall over, but at the same time you were walking forward, you would never actually fall down, because your rate of fall would be matched by your rate of walking.
By your next step forward. That's
right. And
so now I'm seeing that actually the spiritual heart needs to be limited. And that's the motion limited as you come in and out of the sphere of it. And that's the recognition of it, because there is that motion of being in it and being out of it. And so then all the times we wanted to say, what comes and goes isn't real, so the spiritual heart isn't real.
Ultimately, it's not.
Yeah, but we want to say that, but then we can see that that's exactly what we need at this point.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. It's a very, very useful kind of an intermediary. And it's not something we have to manufacture. I mean, as I think I said earlier, I can't imagine anyone living without some kind of a spiritual heart to be devoted to. I mean, everyone cares about something. Everyone's devoted to something.
Can it be as mundane as the Chicago Cubs?
Yes, it can. Sure, why not? It's whatever is significant, substantial, solid, and therefore emulates the self. Being significant, it shares this idea of meaning with me. Being substantial, being solid, it shares something with the self. So it's the perfect intermediary. Yeah.
So this opens up so much tolerance and so much acceptance in others, because we always thought we were superior, that we only went for the capital T truth. And now we can see that everything is useful when it's useful.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think it's valid on both counts. It's valid just because there it is. It's an experience. I mean, how are we to discount anything, really? It's valid in its own right, and it's valid as an intermediary to eventually allow the subject, the little old subject, the ego, the I'm here feeling, to recognize the self. And that's a tall order, to ask the ego, by which I just mean the I am feeling, to ask the I am feeling to recognize the self, which is A, solid, and B, unbounded. That's a tall order. So, to introduce an intermediary is not asking so much.
So then, to recognize, is that too big of a word? Should we just say something like acknowledge? Maybe that's enough. Maybe that is already a calming effect, so that we could just say, yes, that's okay, instead of being against everything or fighting it or saying, I don't believe in all this abstraction. But you can acknowledge it and then just say, let it reveal itself. Let that be my prayer.
Why not? Yeah, I have no problem with that. So, Richard, what I thought we could do in this session is that we could talk about closer to Model 3. Now Model 2, as I said earlier, has exactly 3 elements in it. We gave one example of what those 3 elements might be. They might be these 3 masses: the mass of the self, the mass of the spiritual heart, and the mass of the I am feeling. That would be one example, and I called it mystic astronomy. But of course, there's many other examples. But I suggest that in every case, a mystic art or a mystic science will have 3 elements to it. So I thought in this session we could talk about the cycle of self-knowledge, which has more than 3 elements. It has some extrapolation of the number 3. And I could attempt to show how it's not really so hard to begin to populate that map.
So these are maps of, this is a map of the benchmarks, or somehow. But benchmarks, what are they useful for? Do you need to know where you are along the road, or do you need or do they come up as like unknowns, and you need to kind of recognize them in order to accept them and not be upset by them, and somehow just have someone say, well, that's normal. I mean, that's you're right. You're perfect, actually. And then just relax with them. Is that the helpful part, or what exactly is useful about the benchmarks?
I think you've said it very nicely, that it's helpful to identify some of the milestones on this generic pattern of experience that I'm calling the cycle of self-knowledge. It gives us confidence that we're never off the path. There's really nothing that we can experience that's not somewhere on this cycle. And another way to say it is that every human experience in generic form is experienced each and every time we go through it, the cycle of self-knowledge. Every celestial, divine, mystical, spiritual experience you can think of in its irreducible form can be found on this very basic cycle. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that it certainly has it. I mean, again, Richard, I did all this, to help myself out, because I've had my ups and downs, and there have been times when I've been stuck in the void. There have been times when I've been seriously depressed, and knowing that too, is just another point on the cycle. it makes it easier. As an example, in the Yoga Vasishta, which is a very beloved book in India, Rama, who is a prince, has just become a young man. He's about age 16, 17. He's finished his high school, if you will. And because he's a prince, he's going to start doing, princely duties, which in that day and age meant, dharmic duties befitting a prince. But because he was God incarnate, but he didn't know it yet, he had this burning inside of him. And so he sat down on the floor of his father's hall, and he said to the gathered assembly, he said, "Before I undertake my duties, I must know the truth. I have to know the truth, or I'll sit right here, I'll refuse to eat, and I'll just fast myself to death if someone doesn't tell me the truth." And two interesting things happened. Well, one interesting thing and one interpretation. His guru, the guru of his father's court, Vasishta, said, "Oh, Rama, this is a fitting statement for a prince to make, and indeed I will tell you the truth. But first, my son, I must tell you the half-truth." And he did proceed to tell him the half-truth and then the whole truth, ending in his own divinity. And he did realize that he was God incarnate. The second thing is that it shows you that even Rama, who was the incarnation, of God, or at least in this story, he himself was in a major depressive episode, if you will. He was ready to lay down his life. He was seriously depressed. He really wanted to know the truth.
So is he in the same cycle that we are?
Absolutely. So let's talk about the cycle, shall we?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And the way I'd like to do that is I'll just go through this little play that I've made that I think I talked about before. It's called Daydreams of a Small Town Mystic. And we talked about the preface, and I think I showed this table of contents, and it shows that the scenes in the play are laid out according to the cycle. If we start at the top, then Act 1 starts at the top, and the scenes take us down as we seek. They take us close to the self. We pass very close to the self. We move beyond it, and then we turn around and look back at it, and then we continue and move forward again. So that's the shape of the play, if you will. So we're going to go through this cycle once, and I'm going to suggest what some of these very generic, very obvious milestones are. And I'll try to do it in a poetic way, if you'll allow me. And Richard, I think you'll keep me honest here. If I wax a little too poetic, you'll demand that I clarify, I'm sure. So, okay, Act 1 is forward. Scene 1 is called Here, where my I am is. And I'll just read one of the 3 poems on this page. So I'm suggesting, Richard, that one of the first milestones on the cycle of self-knowledge has to do with noticing, oh, I'm here. I'm never not here. And there's a cartoon here. This came straight out of New Yorker magazine. I didn't edit this at all. And this businessman is answering the phone, and he says, "Damn it, Baxter, I'm a busy man, but I'll write just this once. Who am I?" So I thought that fit in fairly well. So here's our first poem. It's called I See Paris. Here has nothing to do with location, but is simply that place where I am, where my I am is. As I need my I-ness to experience anything, I can only know that which is also here, where my I am is. And as I cannot leave here, Paris and all the world must come to me here, where my I am is. So there is a point on our map. In other words, it's the point where we sort of notice that it's all happening here. It can only happen here where I'm capable of experience.
That's actually really a big statement, you know. I mean, and when you show it on a cycle, and when you show it as one dot and all the dots around, I mean, I think that's a very advanced state when somebody really notices that here, I mean, because most of us, so many of us, the whole world thinks that everything is happening there, wherever there is, you know, there in the board meeting that's going on next week, or there in the you know, in the limitations of our factory and of our nation and of our financial system, and everything's happening somewhere else. But what's happening here? I mean, this seems like a springboard or a preparation just to get there. And I mean, I'm almost saying like the weight is 90 to 10 or 90 to 1 or something like that of how many people, if they're in a cycle, we actually get to the point that say, well, I should really investigate what's here. I mean,
well, maybe one way to look at that is that let's pick a scale that we can work with. Let's pick the scale of a day, not a thought, not a life, not the history of the universe, which are valid scales.
Not a 5-year plan on my
not
company
a 5-year plan
or my country.
But let's pick the scale of a day. I suggest that in the 24-hour cycle, there was a time when you and I and my wife Intisar and my friend Stefan and every normal person passed through this kind of a place where it was just obvious. In other words, it wasn't a big mystical thing. It's just an obvious description. Now, maybe that place, it's not when you're in the full thick of daily action. Maybe it's when you've withdrawn a little bit. You know, in other words, your back and forth in the world has slowed down a little, and you've just started to slow down. You've just started to introspect, and you're like, you know, it's really all happening here where I am.
I don't know, you know, because a lot of times if I would think and people say, here I am again, well, they're talking about it in a conceptual bind, you know, that they think that they keep cycling through. And then here isn't here. It's just like, well, they're intuiting that this conceptual bind is what's here. In other words, my thoughts are real. But okay, here is, I think it's an immensely important step.
I think so too. But not totally foreign. At any rate, here, Richard, I suggested the scale of a day by which to identify that point. Now, what I'm going to suggest further is that different scales are useful to identify different points. In this case, it was the scale of a day that personally I find helpful to identify that point. But there's other scales that are going to be useful to identify other points. And we can switch scales. It's the same pattern, you know, no matter what scale we're at. So we can switch scales at will, just long enough to identify a few points. I mean, it's all for our own use here.
Let's do it.
So let's go to the next point. Let's move a little closer. So what happens next? All right, I said the day's activity slowed down. We start to introspect a little. All right, let's take it another step. We're getting more relaxed. maybe we're almost ready for bed. And now the distinctions of the world are really not as great as they were before. Not only is it all happening here, it's all happening to me. Kind of the same thing, but maybe another step. So the cartoon on this page, it shows a goofy-looking guy sitting in his chair reading a book, and he's surrounded by a cat and a dog and the bird. Now the man has a kind of a silly-looking mustache, and of course all of his pets have the same silly-looking mustache. So it's all about him somehow. That is, anything he can experience, and you alluded to this earlier in our talks, anything we can experience has to have some resonance actually with the experiencer himself. So the name of this point I'm proposing is There's Only One Subjective Experience. That's the name of this point, this micro insight that we have. And let me just read one of the poems on this page. There's 3 poems on every page. This one is called How Do I Live Me? Let Me Count the Ways. Pretty horses above my head, pretty horses plus my toes, horses, toes, and my teddy bear, horses, toes, teddy, and Mickey Mouse. I spread around me the only thing I have to spread, my certain feeling that I am alive. Then I slowly begin to reel it in. This consolidation of subjectivity is commonly referred to as growing up. So what I'm getting at here is that it really is all about me as far as I'm concerned. I have no proof that it was ever about anyone else. Let me expand on that just a little bit. When we're young, let's say 1 or 2 years old, and we're in our crib, or our relatives are holding us, they encourage us to distribute this sense of subjectivity that a child has that he's still trying to form. They encourage us to distribute that. In other words, oh, here's your teddy bear. He's alive. Watch this. And he has a teddy bear dancing. Look, there's on TV, there's Mickey Mouse. Hello, hello. He's alive, isn't he alive? Big Bird's alive. Everybody's alive. Santa Claus is alive. So we're encouraged when we're young to distribute this feeling that I'm here, I exist. This feeling of subjectivity, we distribute it around us, and it's a way to be comfortable, I think, in our world. And everyone wants us to be comfortable when we're very young. But then at some point, we have to start reeling it in. Maybe when we're, 5 or 6, we start to say, well, the cartoon on TV is not actually real, and my teddy bear is not actually alive, and Mickey Mouse is not alive in the same way that I'm alive. So we start to reel it in. We start to consolidate our sense of subjectivity. And the social norm, if you will, is that we stop at a certain acceptable level, which is something like this. I'm alive, I have this locus of subjectivity, and you're alive, you have yours too. And the people in the other room, they have theirs, and the people in the street, they have theirs. So the world is populated by so many loci of subjectivity. That's where we stop. But what if we continued to consolidate? What if we said, well, that fellow in the car ahead of me as I drive down the street, how do I know for sure that he has his own thoughts? Maybe he's just one of my thoughts. Maybe he doesn't have his own subjectivity. I can't prove that he does. As far as I know, he doesn't have thoughts. He is a thought. He's one of my thoughts. So in other words, we really test the limits of consolidation of subjectivity. How far can I consolidate? Really, how many different subjectivities are there? How many different sentiences are there? Do I really need more than one to figure things out? So now we're starting to get a little more serious. How many subjects of experience do I need to figure things out?
So we're saying it all happens with me, so, maybe that's a discovery. Generally, I suppose we all stop at the conventional level and just accept myself and others, and even honor that in saying everyone has equal rights, or everyone has some equality of opportunity, and we codify that. So then, but okay, that's another point that could happen, right?
Yeah, and I think let's go back to our daily cycle. Doesn't that happen as you close your eyes, but before you start to dream, you close your eyes and you're like, it's really all about me here. I mean, I'm the one who's leaving wakefulness and heading towards dream. I mean, isn't it all about me? Why does it have to be about anyone else right now? As far as my immediate experience, really, isn't there just one subject of experience for me right now at 11 p.m. this evening as I head towards dream? Isn't it valid to say that 11 p.m. we all have the experience to some extent that there's only one subject of experience? So that's kind of a point on our map. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just doing what we can. We're trying things out. We're populating this cycle of self-knowledge.
So that's a couple of benchmarks.
Okay, there's a couple.
Yeah.
Let's go on.
Why not?
All right. Scene 3 in the first movement, the movement called Forward. I just call it the life cycle of a thought. Let me read the first poem on this page. And by the way, the cartoon, it shows a businessman sitting at his desk, and he has some kind of a plaque behind him. It's a frame, but instead of like the first dollar he ever made, it says, "My first thought." And I think this is from a cartoonist who wrote me a nice letter of rejection. I used to be a gag writer for cartoons, and I used to send them to New Yorker cartoonists. I have a beautiful collection of rejection slips from half the people in this little book here. So here's a poem. It's called Always About I, but Never About Me. Not knowing itself to be the source of light, the sun lit a candle. Not trusting its calming power, the ocean commissioned a rain cloud. Not recognizing myself, I launched a thought world to seduce I-ness from every petty object. All of history plays out in me each day, and between each in and out breath, and in the life cycle of every thought. Between this moment and the next lies the DNA of heaven and earth, and all which may ever be expressed therein. So by the time we've really headed towards sticking with the day scale here, by the time we've really started heading towards dreamland, it's definitely all about me. And not only that, anything that can ever happen to anyone has probably happened to me sometime in the last 24 hours, if I reduce it to its generic pattern. There's this growing feeling that all we really have is a very basic pattern, a pattern which describes the waxing and waning of the process of thinking. So I'll keep moving.
Good.
Here's the next one. Scene 4. It's called The World is a Single Unit. Well, a minute ago we were talking about how there's only one subject, and now I'm saying there's only one object. That is to say, there's only one objective world. Of all these objects in the world, they're actually all combined into one object. which we call the world. The world is a single unit. And the cartoon on this page, it says, "Welcome to the universe in a grain of sand." And I definitely have a rejection slip from this lady. And it shows, it's just very creative. The print is way too small for me to even read it tonight, but it's very, very clever. And one of the poems on this page is called "Crest Jewel of Discrimination." And it says, "Is a dream mirage any less real than a real mirage, or the rest of the dream? Where's the lasting line between these ephemeral objects? Noticing that the illusion is of a single piece must come first, and is as necessary a part of waking up as noticing that it's not real. How strange that I know this about my dream, yet continue to believe that my waking life is a patchwork of separate parts. As I can only compare two items at a time, the only fruitful distinction I can make is between my I-ness and my world as a whole. Only then may I decide which is more real. Only then may I compare the winner to these intimations of something yet more singular." So there's a point on the cycle. It's the point called the world is a single unit. It's the point that we all pass through over and over again, where there is some honest recognition that I'm not dealing with a lot of separate parts here. I'm dealing with one environment, which is kind of all of one piece. I haven't decided how real this environment is, but I might as well treat it all as one unit. There's another very interesting thing about this particular milestone point. You notice that I ended by saying, only then may I compare the winner to these intimations of something yet more singular. Now we're low enough on the overall cycle that we're starting to sense that there's something different at the very bottom. I compare it like if you're walking towards the ocean, and you raised this issue earlier actually, and I asked you to wait on it, but I think it was very insightful what you were saying is that, and I'll remind you, Richard, of where that was. When I was talking about the empty void, you were saying, yes, but as you approach that, don't you begin to sense the presence of the self even before you pass closest to it? Yes, I think you do, in the sense that, well, let me use this analogy. If you're walking towards the ocean, and between you and the ocean there's a hill. Now you haven't seen the ocean yet, but you smell the salt in the air. See, there's an intimation. There's some kind of a clue that something big is around the corner. So in this context, what I'm saying is that when the current cycle, whether it's a thought, a day, a life, a career of seeking, or whatever we choose, at the point where it's lost most of its steam, we do begin to sense that there's something bigger. There's something bigger to be discovered when this particular iteration is done. And this is the first reference to that. So here is another point on our cycle of self-knowledge.
So that we're gradually arriving at kind of like the here-ness, and then kind of like the me-ness. It's kind of like the springboard of where
very good
where thoughts and perceptions are emanating. And then something about the compactness, or like these things emanate in a unit, or something about all the multifarious diversity is suspect. And,
very good.
Somehow this is kind of like a rolling perception that is just kind of
That's right.
Some doubts are happening that all my old ways, where I thought everything was attacking and coming from all directions and so on.
Yes.
Some of that is kind of maybe not even dropped away, but there's some doubt about it. And in every one of those perceptions, in a way, and maybe it's only a reflection of something that that can, I don't know what that is, some kind of projection or something, you know, which is we can see things from angles, but we're not even so sure of the direction, right? I mean, the direction becomes doubted. Is that coming in on me and bombarding me, or is that something I'm sending out there and searching to find something that's similar and could be verified by these suppositions? And gradually this some kind of a kernel that is somehow consolidating and coming to a potency that can be relevant and actually discover or have the power to pierce through something that has been taken for granted, and just saying, oh, that's real, that's a real thing that's there, and we might be able to. You're saying that we're gathering our forces, or what are we doing? Am I getting kind of the feel of it? Or
I think you did a good job. You know, as again, a thought starts with a lot of energy and momentum, and in its full glory, it defines our entire world. And then as it loses momentum and it loses its resources, now we don't have enough resources to spread around. I can really only afford to think of one place, and I'll call that here. And I can really only afford to think of one subject of experience, and I'll call that me. And I can really only afford to think of one environmental factor, and I'll call that my world as a whole. So we've really, by necessity, simplified our equation. All right, there's here, there's me, there's world. We've definitely simplified things, and the advantage of doing that is that it makes it easier then to compare those things to each other, and ultimately to compare those things to this sense that there's something big around the corner. So let me offer...
So we're still going forward, right?
We are still moving forward. Let me check the table of contents. Okay, the last scene is scene 6, so I'm going to read scene 5 now. Scene 5, getting pretty close to the bottom as this cycle is winding down. This is called Poems Nobody Wants. There's no such thing as life. Well, that's pretty mean. No such thing as life. Now, this one, it shows the jester, the court jester, talking to the king. And apparently he said something pretty depressing because the king is crying. And the jester says, but I digress. He's done what we've done. He's gotten too serious. He has told the king, you know, the king represents the ego, and the jester represents the wise man who must forfeit his ego to be a counselor to the king. But he's gone too far. He's made the king very sad here. He's just told the king that there's no such thing as life, essentially. We just can't carry all these concepts with us at this point. We're running out of, if you're in an airplane that's running out of gas and you're about to crash, well, you have to throw everything out the door. And, you throw them out in the order of their importance. So the least important thing is the first thing out the door. That'd be a very FIFO approach, right? And the most important thing will be the last thing out the door. And one of the things we really love is the idea of life. We love to believe that we not only exist, but beyond that, we are alive. So let me...
So we're talking about this consolidation, like this economy that's happening to us. And it's an economy in the life cycle of a thought, right?
Yes, it is.
And it could be in your life cycle, too, as you weaken and sicken and age
on
and
the scale of a human life.
right. But somehow this economy and this consolidation is coming to the bare essentials. And that's actually what our whole exercise when we're talking about existence is. We say we want to know the bare essential or the essential. What's essential? And maybe it's a little more bare than we had assumed. And maybe that's surprising, and we're at a surprising stage right now.
There's no doubt about it that this is a sad state of affairs.
Just going forward is pretty weird, huh?
Whether the life is ending, or the day is ending, or the thought is ending, or the universe is ending, something's ending. And
how about just a 5-year plan?
Okay.
But I guess we didn't make our goals.
So I can't resist. I'm going to have to read at least 2, possibly 3 poems on this page. The first one is called Cat's Play. It says, "The kitten taps its toy, then jumps at seeing it move. Head cocked, she wonders, is it alive? Better safe than sorry, she attacks. Are we so different? Like a cat with her toy, we infuse matter with awareness and call it life." The next one is called...
That's a pretty big statement. But I mean, it's really interesting. We infuse matter with awareness and call it life.
Yes.
I mean, matter. I guess my doubt is in matter, I mean, but awareness and life seem to be stronger.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Huh?
We'll come back to them. This is like, it's a suggestion. It's what I call a micro insight. It's the kind of thing that is obvious at a certain
Or a
point.
micro koan, in other words, something to look into.
Yeah. Yes. And it's not hard to have these little insights, but again, I really believe that different people have different personality types. My personality type is that I enjoy catching a few of them. That's all. I may not have more than the average person, but I've enjoyed snagging a few of them and then putting them down and then saying, oh, this one came first and this one came second. So here's poem number 2, and it's called Prior to Life. What is this thing we call life, which I conferred upon my teddy bear when I was 2 and revoked when I was 10? Living is what happens when we forget that we are prior to life. It is the very denial of truth which says, I believe in sparkling eternity, but not in solid here-ness. Only being is. Life, like world, mind, and consciousness, is a placebo effect. That's kind of mean. To say that life is a placebo effect.
Life, and say again those 3, life and...
Life, like world, mind, and consciousness, is a placebo effect.
So sparkling eternity is my belief, and my denial is
solid here-ness.
Solid here-ness.
Yeah. These are all suggestions. The last poem on this page is called Get Over It to Make Way for Something Better. Even a rock knows more than I. It knows there's no such thing as life. It has existence, which is far more real. It has no fear and cannot die. To memory, meaning, and mind, this will always seem depressing. But to being, it's a simple description of what's obvious. To consider even for a moment that there's no such thing as life is to make room for a glimpse of that upon which my queen appears to dance. And that's the end of Act 1, forward. So Act 1 has taken us to a very depressing place.
Taken us to its toll, huh?
It's certainly taken its toll on us. Let's move to Act 2.
So all these decorations we have, right?
It's a good word for them.
We hang on to this here-ness and say, oh, there's the spiritual heart. There's the, the living awareness. We can give a lot of great definitions and great distinctions and really decorate our existence.
That's right. We can add a lot of ideas in there. Now, Richard, let me suggest, so far what we've done is we've started at the surface level of life, and we've kind of worked our way down the subtleties. You can call it seeking, or you can call it just the loss of momentum of the current thought or the current cycle. In any case, we're leaving behind the wonderful multiplicity of the world, and we're moving towards the ground state. Let me suggest that what happens next is that without being fully aware of it, we actually pass quite close to the self. Even though we've jettisoned most of our awareness, we're now really...
Have we jettisoned awareness, or have we jettisoned... What have we jettisoned? We have jettisoned a lot of our ideas.
That's a fair distinction.
And then we have jettisoned a lot of our contentment and things that were based on comforts that we assumed. Assumed comforts are kind of gone. And so then we're a little bit in a shaky territory.
But you're right. We can't be completely unaware of things, or, no teacher could ever have noticed the bottom of this diagram. Let me suggest that what happens next is that we continue in our relative darkness as the momentum carries us partway up the other side, but then we stop and we say, wait a minute. What's going on here? You see, now our awareness has returned to the point where we have a very fundamental decision to make. Do I continue and ride the next thought up to its apex?
So we're probably kind of tempted, because we can feel like we could feel something as the self, something more, the ocean, or something we can feel over the hill. And when we're rising up, we can feel that enthusiasm and that variability and that that great multiplicity and all that commotion and the big party, and that somehow we have a temptation to go there too, don't we?
Well, that's really well put. We find ourselves at an equilibrium point. We find ourselves, and let me just say that another way to look at this is that we go partway down, and then we actually jump across, and we find ourselves right about here at the beginning of Act 2. Where there's an equilibrium. There's about an equal pull either to go back to that self that we just passed, or to go on to the beautiful world that we're just now beginning to create. So there's a fundamental choice that happens there. I'm not putting the burden and saying we must choose the right thing. I'm just saying...
So in a way, you're not even saying we choose, right? It's just going to happen the way it happens.
Yeah, that's true.
We're in a cycle that I don't know where we are in the cycle.
It's going to keep doing its thing. But we can use that word for people who like to say there's a choice there. We can call it a choice. I sometimes call this point of equilibrium, the point of free will, because here is where our free will
appears.
Really means something. There's a great deal of leverage here. In other words, there's a great potency. If we choose to look outwards towards the new world that we're creating, it'll quickly gain its own momentum. It'll leverage itself into a whole world. If, on the other hand, we choose to look back towards the self, there's a tremendous opportunity there. There's a tremendous leverage. One little gesture of the head, metaphorically, inside, one intention to look back. Where was I just before this? Where this feeling, this brand new feeling that I'm here, Where was that just a split second ago? The merest intention to wonder along those lines will likewise be leveraged into an incredible opportunity. So there's so many beautiful names for that particular point, that wonderful point, which is the beginning of Act 2. Act 2 is backwards. I'm going to suggest that we look at what happens if we go back towards the self. So I'll read a few poems in this.
So the
movement.
scenes go from
halfway up,
and then they
back
go back
down
toward
again.
the self.
Yes, this is our backwards phase. Remember the life cycle of a ghost? He has his forward phase.
Backward and forward.
I don't know if I ever really finished that, but let me just say that a ghost has his forward phase in which he feels he's a regular person, he's moving forward, he's doing his thing. Then he has a backwards phase where he's going, wait a minute, there's some clues here. Things aren't what they seem. What's that? What's that? You see, there's some disturbing inconsistencies here, and this is causing him to backpedal and say, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. You see, so there's a definite backward phase here. After some point, he gets the information that he's dead, and then he can move on forward again, whether we say he goes to heaven or... So in the life cycle of a ghost, there's a forward, backward, forward movement. And I believe that same forward, backward, forward thing happens here if we take a closer look at this cycle of self-knowledge. So what would some of these be? All right, the first one, Act 2, in which I see my solid self. Scene 1, the self of sleep. And the cartoon shows a nerdy guy sitting in his chair. It must be late in the evening, and the TV says, "This concludes the conscious portion of your day, and good night." So the first poem is called Miss Slumber Stood. My brothers are praised above me, for I am called sleep. Yet that eternally full moment is with me even now. In that still place, I have it all. Being, awareness, and bliss, the three treasures of the ancients, the three names of truth. The next one is called In Praise of Sleep. Ironically, the one thing I know for sure is that I slept well. Apparently, worldlessness equals happiness, but I am not entirely absent. Clearly, he who knows that I slept well is he who knows me best. If the ocean were as dense as my favorite chunk of sleep, where'd be room for fishes? To understand the waking state, I ask, what do I know about lucid dream? To understand awakening, I ask, what do I know about lucid sleep? And the last one on this page is called Always Asleep. It's strange that in the dark is where self-knowledge shines, and it's odd that I awake and cry, alas, I am lost to peace. Can I have changed that much in a moment? And can I truly be ignorant 2/3 of the day? Some suggestion that sleep is not only dullness.
Right. I mean, you hear that sleep is an exalted state, but then, well, let's say I'm permanently asleep, and they'll wake me up just before I pass. I mean, that doesn't sound all that good use of a life.
If
People are in a coma.
If you're referring to the normal experience of sleep, I would agree with you. But let's talk for just a moment about dream. We all agree that there's regular dream and then there's lucid dream. Well, what if there's regular sleep and then there's lucid sleep? Now, lucid sleep, that would be like keeping the peace half, but getting rid of the dullness half. So, yes, I'd spend the next 20, 30 years like that.
Why do we call it lucid sleep? Why don't we just get rid of the dullness and get rid of, and drop our anxiety just in this waking state? Do we consider that, or do we just say, no, that's impossible? Or what's so real about anxiety?
Oh, this is just an opinion. My own opinion is that there is lucid sleep, there is lucid dream, but there's no lucid waking. I realize that that statement will not sit well with everyone. That's my personal impression so far. Sleep is, in some sense, closest to self-knowledge. Not in every sense.
So much of that sounds like a projection. Like an assumption, like some kind of a logical path, that says, okay, well, there's peace in sleep, and then peace, something important about life is known. And I don't know if we're going to even say that life is absent, and we said that was just an accoutrement or a pair of earrings that we wear just so that we can feel comfortable, the idea that we are alive. But I mean, let's just say that we have a life, and that lucid life, I don't know, I would choose to define it as a notch somewhere along the line there that you could fall into, whether it's only by grace or whether it's by accident or whether it's whatever it is. I guess I'm believing that there is a lucid life.
I guess when I say that I believe there's lucid dream, I'm picturing a dream in that Model 2 area where there are celestial and ephemeral and wonderful experiences, for example, visions of the gods and so on. And when I think about the waking state, I think about, more mundane life experiences, Model 3, so to speak. And I could be wrong about this, Richard. It's just one way to look at things. But I'll respect your reservation on that point, and let me suggest another milestone, which I call a glimpse of self. A glimpse of self. Really one of the key points on this whole cycle here. So Act 1 is called Santa and the Self. Oh, and the cartoon, it shows two archaeologists, and they've discovered this little pyramid in the sand, and one of them says to the other, "This could be the find of the century," depending, of course, how far down it goes. Anyway, of course, that's the self, right? Santa and the self. All talk of cycles aside for now, it's easy to glimpse the self, but impossible to do so more than once. Can I learn the truth about Santa twice? Full disclosure works for the true as well as the false, and even a single glimpse of timelessness lasts forever. I think that's the only one I'll read on that. Now we're starting to get a little bit devotional. See, what's happening is we reached that equilibrium point, and we're exploring what it's like to move back in the direction of self. This is in that special region. This is in that first...
Did we miss that before? Or is that where we shortcutted? Or is that we didn't go through that coming back up? Or somehow there's always a slip through, and then there's a possibility to go down closer on the other side?
I think so. I think that's right. I think real devotion, non-dual devotion, does not happen in the forward march. It happens in the backward march. I think it's true. I think we bail out, we truncate, the overall experience of the cycle, jump to the other side. Then we have the opportunity to go back towards the self. And this is the realm of devotion. This is my own impression so far. That's what I've noticed about these points. Well, the next one, so now I can tell you that the next 2 or 3, or at least, are devotional. And I had mentioned to you before that I had identified a few poetic voices that I like to use when I write poems. And one is the voice of dedication to my wife, who is a lot of the time my spiritual heart. Here's another one. This is that voice of non-dual devotion as one approaches first the spiritual heart and then the self in this backward march. Spiritual heart, in most cases, we can take to be the guru, and then the self as we move through this backward phase. So, this one is called the Me-Shaped Balloon, or at least that's the name of this. Yes, that's the name of this scene. And here it shows 2 businessmen, and one of them is a balloon in the shape of a man who's been popped. Must be he lost out on the business deal, and he's flying around the room, and the other fellow is saying, "That's right, RB. Enjoy your last fling." So, the poem here is called Accumulation of Insight. How many cherries must I see before I call it a cherry tree? How many pinpricks does it take to deflate a lead balloon? How many glimpses will I need to recognize my still and silent self? We keep getting these little tiny pokes. But you know, our skin is thick. We're not like a thin rubber balloon where one little pinprick will do the job. We're made out of leather or lead or something pretty tough, and so it takes a lot of them. But they add up. They definitely add up. Scene 4 is called True Memory, and it just shows this businessman holding up a picture of himself, and it says, "The real me." I also have a wonderful rejection slip from this artist. He actually referred me to a couple of the others. He said, "You know, I can't choose your work, but some of it's not bad, and why don't you try this guy and that guy?" Okay. So, at least one of these I think is good. The first one is called, Can the Lesser Forget the Greater? How to remember that which is prior to mind and memory. How to bring it into focus when it is everywhere, the same solidness. How to forget that which is far more real than I who would forget it. Can the balloon forget the needle? The peasant, the king? The lamb, the lion? Or the movie, the screen? This is called True Memory. And we saw, Richard, in the preface where I said, in reference to the ghost, I said, no real time having passed, memory of truth is the same as truth now. You know, that's not true of anything else. In other words, a memory of my pen is not identical to my pen. But a memory of the self is identical to the self. Now, I've really said that the spiritual heart is identical to the self. I guess you can chalk that up to the kind of fuzzy-minded thinking that happens at this stage of the cycle, this sort of non-dual
devotion. Even all that fuzzy, you know, because like I think you said something like, the memory of timelessness lasts forever.
You bet.
So, I mean, it's kind of like a pin that broke a balloon, right?
Yes, and it's not about you and your skill in having a timeless glimpse. It's about that thing that you glimpsed, which is itself timelessness. If the thing that you see is itself timelessness, Doesn't matter how long you see it. It's about it. It's not about you and how well you saw it. It's not even that I saw it with certainty. It's that I saw certainty. So here's this poem. It's called Memory of Self is in the Present. To imagine a place where I am not is to imagine not I-ness. This I cannot do. Ignorance of truth is the same as the existence of non-existence. Both are clearly impossible. Because it is always in the present, what cannot be remembered cannot be forgotten. That's the truth. Well, that's the feeling of non-dual devotion. There is this next one, which is called The First Law of Self-Knowledge. I actually skipped over, you have to forgive me, I skipped over the second law because we had done so much exploration of the first movement forward that I left the last one out, which is the second law of self-knowledge, that the world doesn't exist. But here now is the first law. And do you remember when I said, first I'll tell you the truth, but first I'll tell you the half-truth? Well, the first half-truth was that that the world doesn't exist. That came first. The half-truth came first, chronologically. Now we return to really the full truth, which is that the self does exist. And this poem shows some people at a party, and there's a little group of people talking, and one guy's making his way towards the group. And one of the people in the group says, uh-oh, here it comes again. Mr. Existence is neither real nor unreal, it simply is. It's amazing. All of these were right out of New Yorker. All right, this one is called Self is Solid. There may be unhappiness or unconsciousness, but there's no such thing as non-existence. So without fear of extinction, I turn quickly and look before my mind to dense stillness and see that self is nothing more or less than solid existence. If solidness is the measure of reality, then it's worth wondering, what does it finally mean to be solid? What does it matter how real I am when I am is reality itself? And what is this density within my chest? Sense of solidness. I'm happy now to say that the spiritual heart is the self. At this particular point or milestone on the cycle of self-knowledge, we don't need to make a distinction. We're between these two. And there's a feeling of solidness. There is literally a feeling of solidness in my chest right now, the right side of my chest. And that's that sense of solidness. Let me continue. Act 2, the dark sun. Have you seen it? The dark sun, the black hole, spelled W-H. The solid mass of being. As dark sun, I don't need light to see myself. As black hole, I don't need consciousness to know myself. Impossibly dense. Nothing escapes me, so nothing is created. My self-knowledge is non-dual, a solid mass of existence. I alone am. This is everyone's experience who inevitably turns to see the self. And the last one in the backward movement is called non-dual devotion. And this just shows a guy standing in one of those three-way mirrors, and somehow it's the back of his head in every mirror. Not quite sure what that means, but okay. This one says, Satguru is myself. In the space which is smaller than the smallest dwells that which is bigger than the biggest. The lion waits between my thoughts, knowing I cannot think forever. Once inside his jaws, there's only enough time to savor my last gasp of ignorance. True devotion is non-dual and is another name for self. God, self, and Satguru are the same. I'll just continue. The first thing I stepped over in my search for you was you. I pictured you, a subject of experience, like me, only larger. I imagined you as pure consciousness, the first and only illusion. I assumed you were an abstraction and nothing more. Imagine my surprise when you appeared like a mountain on a plain. The first thing I stepped over was you, compared to which all else is but colored smoke. I'll stop there. That's the end of the second movement, the backwards movement, the movement that gives us a glimpse of self. So all that's left now that we've glimpsed the self, all that's left is to move forward again. This, going back to the preface, the ghost has seen that in the very moment that he realized he'd been killed, he realized no time had passed since he was killed. See? No time has passed. Monday night at 8 p.m. he was shot. All these things seemed to happen, and after all of these things, he realized he was shot. He found himself there in that moment, and it was Monday night at 8 p.m. No time passed. That's this moment. So now let's move forward.
So it's pretty incredible, your structure, what you've done.
Well, we're virtually done.
Well, I don't know. What happened? Have we recognized self?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good.
I'm feeling quite still myself. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm feeling overwhelmed or I don't know if something burst or some capacity to feel that I'm comprehending, or that I should be, at least if you go to a Christian church, they'll hand you a Bible and you can read along or something. Incredible.
Well, thank you, Richard. Not to bring you down, but it'll probably take each of us many passes through this cycle to, continually repopulate.
To recognize it.
Yeah, we get a little glimpse here and get a little recognition there, and it kind of adds up. Well, Act 3 forward is called In Which I Begin to Get Over a Glimpse of Self. And the cartoon, it shows a guy in a racy car visiting a Buddhist monastery, and there's a couple of monks standing by the car, and they say, "It was so nice of you to visit us after your enlightenment." The guy got enlightened, which of course means he went out and made $1 million, became rich, and bought a big car and went back to say hi. Act 1, Amazing Grace. Forsaking all the rest, I found you, only to find that you had forsaken nothing and no one. Grace is not the limited empathy for one sad soul, but your wholesale love for the illusory world, the non-existence of illusion, the dense reality of self, and the impossible equivalence of these two. What is grace but this third act of your mercy? There's 3 counterintuitives: the non-existence of illusion, the dense reality of self, and the impossible equivalence of these two. there's got to be one counterintuitive in every good movement. Here it says, Act 2, don't be sad. Everything equally, identically, and collectively never happened. But it seems that mere non-existence is not enough to stop the world from its dance. This world can be joyful. It may even reclaim its reality, but it will never truly exist. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
So somehow that non-existence is really the ticket to the dance.
Yeah, that's right. And that's very well put, because here's Shankara's third law. Not only self exists and world doesn't exist, but self is world. Now, having really owned the possibility that the world doesn't exist, only having gone there, are we in a position to say that it's therefore not different than self? You know, you got self, and that's a category of its own. And then you got the non-existent world, and that's not even real enough to get its own category. So there's no second category. So whatever you're looking at, it's only the self. Only in this sense can we say that self is world. But if asked point blank, are you telling me that the world exists? If asked like that, I'll have to say no. I will never reverse. I will never go backwards from the third law to the second law and change that second law and say that the world exists. I will just find a context in which to say it, but I will not reverse it. The last poem, I think I'll skip that. Richard, I'll just read this last page here. And this is called Epilogue, The Two Mountains. The Two Mountains. Will you please help me remember to come back to the astronaut after we talk about the two mountains? Okay. It shows this wise man or wise man in training walking up a mountain or a hill. He gets halfway up and there's a sign that says, think. Well, he turns around and goes back down. First there's a mountain, then there's no mountain, then there is. So what's the difference between the two? The problem with the world was not its reality, but its existence. While the former problem has been fixed, the latter has not and cannot. But why dwell on technicalities when my queen is even now beginning her next dance of wonderful mischief? And the very last poem is called Prodigal World. And just to be a microcosm, it also has forward, backward, forward. So, forward, first, I knew the world as everyone does, and that was the first mountain of love. Backward, then I saw the majestic mountain of self and knew what it means to truly exist, and the world knew itself to be lacking and left its home in my heart. Forward, as I am that which has no absence or opposite, I am in position to judge the world's worth, and I declare a feast for the second mountain of love, the prodigal world, come home to my embrace. And the last cartoon on the back, it shows a few monks, and the head monk is saying one of the others, he's saying, once again, I like the idea of your ideas more than your actual ideas. There you go.
Wow, what a ride. You know, I don't really feel equipped to make any comments or any draw any lines or pull any strings.
It's a bit of art. It's a bit of fun. And it's an attempt to playfully put a few things on the map, build it up a little, tear it down a little. Do it in a way that works for me or for you. It's a way to legitimize this idea that there's a generic and pretty simple pattern that the cycle of self-knowledge goes through at whatever scale and whatever the particular context or story might be. It kind of waxes, it kind of wanes, it kind of truncates, it kind of starts over and then has the opportunity to look back or not and start again and fade again and move past and get its momentum, or maybe get captured by the spiritual heart, do a little bit of non-dual devotional orbiting of that, and then move on up again. Some kind of a very basic pattern here that we can put a few names on, we can build them up, we can tear them down.
It's one of the nice things is just to have all these aspects laid out on a table and just say, well, these are all quite normal. And maybe you can follow this path, or maybe you've run into some of these things, or maybe you never have, or maybe you will tomorrow. And who knows, maybe you can just make your own path around here. You don't have to go around and say, no, I'm going to go back up there and play businessman.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Or you can find somewhere to engage the world in a point that you want to rest in or stay in. And I think one of the greatest values that I see is that all these kind of things that come and go in our lives, and these insights and these lack of insights, become more routine, and we can just kind of, I want to say accept them, but I want to say more than that. I just want to say somehow
just relax,
vibrate with them.
Yeah.
Just vibrate with them as they resonate through us, and without any objection.
I like it. The particulars are different, scales change, but it's pretty much the same pattern. I think the last thing I'd like to say about that, about the cycle itself, is something about what I think of as the three inner teachers. That somewhere at the top, right about the time that we have had enough of going back and forth on the surface of life and have turned the corner to start to introspect, to start to seek, whether because we're so spiritual or whether because we're just getting tired, losing a little bit of energy, right about there sits that form of the I feeling that I call the Red Buddha. And the Red Buddha always speaks up and reminds me to look inside. He always does his job. He always speaks up and says, to whom are these thoughts? To whom are these thoughts? Well, to me. Okay, what's the nature of this me? What do you mean when you say me? Is this me a subject? Is this subject different than objects? Are there two kinds of objects? Is it another object? So he'll always do that. With every pass of the cycle, every pass through the cycle. I may not always, feel the need to listen to it, but he'll do his job. Now, after introspection has run its course, there will most likely be some fleeting moment of a feeling of loss or concern. Not always, but it's natural. boundaries are so much less here. And here sits that form of the I feeling that I call the green Buddha. And the green Buddha will always speak up at this point and tell me not to be afraid. He'll always do his job. And then I'll pass close to the self, and then I'll start to move up, and I'll reach that equilibrium point, which has so many beautiful names in the mystic literature. And right at that point sits the blue Buddha, the mightiest of the three. And he will always do his job. He will always stop me with one foot in the air before I decide where to put that foot, onto the next new world that I'm building, or to go back. And he will always say, stop. Just stop for a quarter of a second. You can decide which way you want to go, but just stop for a quarter of a second. So he'll always do that. So I call that the three inner teachers. These are nothing but impulses of the, this whole thing is nothing but shades and flavors of the I thought. And these are generic instances or forms of the I thought. They're at the transition places. They come as we turn a corner, as one phase runs out of steam, but before the next phase begins. So they sit there and they do their job. To me, it's, again, it's a bit of a mystic interpretation, but it's kind of comforting to know that they're there. They're doing their job. They will always speak up. And when I need to hear them, I'll hear them.
I think the red Buddha is very common, right? And we don't often do it. He says avert from the outer world. Try it out. And we think that's a great wisdom but rarely follow it for many, many years anyhow. And we'll do it later. We don't have time, or try to do it at a part-time or something. We're always solving our problems outside. So then I think some of us can sense that there is a green Buddha, the green Buddha that says, don't be afraid, or that fear is useless.
Or useful.
But I don't know how many of us have ever paid attention to the blue Buddha that says, pause.
I think
maybe we're kind of like just relieved to be back in motion again and just get rid of this whole thing. And we're pretty happy to hop on the train and get the hell out of Dodge.
I think we turn around more often than we give ourselves credit for. We don't always remember it. But I think we've spotted a few cherries on the cherry tree. I think the true memory has been noted by everyone.
So pause doesn't necessarily mean doubt.
Right.
Pause means look back and take stock and celebrate that. Celebrate that on your next cycle.
You mean the blue Buddha?
Yeah.
It can just mean just stop your forward motion and realize you have a choice here. You can go up if you want to, or you can turn around if you want to. But for now, just give me a quarter second. In fact, Papaji, who, in my own life, I have whatever dreams or visions of different teachers. And it seems like it's always Papaji who's playing the role of the blue Buddha, coming in the middle of a dream or a lucid dream and coming out of nowhere and saying, boo, stop, think about it. And somehow it's Ramana who comes and plays the role of the green Buddha in a dream or whatever you want to call it, who comes when I'm scared. Says, don't be afraid. We've come full circle because we started in purely logical terms talking about the difference between existence and non-existence. Then we moved to experience, and then I suggested that there's, as we started to talk about Model 2, I suggested that there is a value in working with exercises that can help us develop the sixth sense, the first sense, the sense of solidness. And then at the end, we're talking about in the epilogue, the two mountains. And I finished by saying, the prodigal world, come home to my embrace. And so, the question is, if the Zen koan says, first there's a mountain and there is no mountain, then there is, what is the difference between the first mountain and the last mountain? And I suggest, going all the way back to our starting point, it is precisely the difference in feeling between presence and absence. Nothing other than that. Between fullness and emptiness. There's a difference in feeling between being surrounded by something and being surrounded by nothing. So that's the best I can do, Richard. There's logic. There's a testimony of firsthand experience. There's a little name dropping. There's my attempt to make a play of poems. There's, drawings and sketches and models and whatnot, all to say that there are three useful ways to look at things. They work together. None of them are wrong. And I believe they help us to move towards an actual resonant feeling, an actual feeling, which is a recognition of solidness, first, in the form of that little tiny I thought, then in the form of the center of the spiritual heart, and finally in the form of the self, which has no center.
Wow, I mean, I'm so blown away. Such an incredible structure. And really not to be followed like I was following the first two sessions somehow. Maybe as an exercise in another time, in another view, maybe that could occur, that I would just follow that and say, these are all useful stopping points. And hearing this precursor of these possibilities is somehow a freedom, that I can entertain them, and I cannot feel, I can follow the Ramana Green Buddha and say, don't be afraid. And I can have a freedom to move to comfort or move away from comfort.
Courage.
Move toward courage. And one is not better than the other.
Right.
Just the definition of the moment. And maybe the discomfort is the definition of the moment. And,
it's an honest thing.
And another time it might not be a discomfort. Maybe it'll be a freedom and a joy, and the release of a burden.
And there's no need to posture, and this is coming from someone who's done a lot of posturing. I spent a lot of time trying to make myself look really good and look enlightened and so on. But, if every point along the cycle is innocent, valid, and merely descriptive, if a well-intentioned, honest person would simply describe that as his current experience, then we're innocent at all these various points. There's no real need to hang on to one of them and say, here I look good, here I look bad. I mean, you might see me 20 minutes from now do something very foolish. I mean, I'm just saying, we're just regular people. It's not about
posturing.
It's not about the person. It's about this truth, which is somehow very real.
So I really appreciate this chance to introduce this structure and these possibilities, and introduce it in a way that without any pretentiousness, and just as a gift. And I owe you great gratitude to trust me to be here and to somehow be a sounding board, or be a way that these can take a life. And I know they have life also, but just to somehow resonate from many people's hearts, the ones I know, and just be tested against their experience. And I'm deeply honored, and I thank you, Michael.
Oh, I thank you too, Richard. It's a pleasure just hanging out with you, and it's a great service you provided to me personally. I appreciate it. Let me shake your hand.
Okay.
Across the cameras.
Across the cameras. We did it there. So maybe it's a different kind of a wrap-up than I like to talk a lot, but I feel speechless. And whether we'll try to make an epilogue and try to make some kind of a so-called neat package. And it's a very neat package, and it's very large. And I don't know what Michael's intentions are, or how this thing could be published or put out in all its glory. And hopefully this gave some incentive, and maybe some of you will send in your feedback and demand it. Demand a release, and Michael will be a coming author. Not only a poet, but get this manual together. But what a privilege, and what a community we have, and how honored we can be when people trust us and give us their work and say, show this, let it be known. And so it's only happening because somebody has interest, you have interest, and you've gathered, and you're willing to talk and expose yourself and show yourself, and be in a community, which we already are anyhow, but just to acknowledge it. So my thanks go out to you. Good night.